Aloha. Good to see you all today. Thank you for coming. I know it is a little sparse, but we started a little early today, and I know that some people thought that we were starting at the same time. So I think people will be trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a full agenda today. So thank you, though, for those of you who did read the program and did show up on time. Mahalo. My name is Mary Vaughn Johnson. I am the Federal Director of the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center. This is Darren Lerner. He is my counterpart at the consortium. So together we manage PI-CASC. PI-CASC is a partnership wherein we use USGS monies and support projects and directed research and competitive research. And we also, through the consortium side, support students and faculty from the K through 12 level up through postdocs and early faculty, mid-career faculty, and faculty who are figuring out their retirement plans. I'm going to briefly go over yesterday. If you weren't with us yesterday was a great program that we had that was organized. It was primarily focused on fire and drought. We did have a fabulous keynote presentation that basically summarized everything that is ongoing with fire and the connectivity across the landscape through the science and through the indigenous knowledge, but also the connectivity across the communities and the fact that really when we talk about how are we going to manage fire, how are we going to face fire, what does fire look like in climate change, it all comes back to us because it all comes back to what are we going to do. And I think that you'll probably find that theme runs through today, that the human factor weighs large on climate adaptation because the earth is going to move where the earth is going to move. It's what we choose to do. We went through a number of research management presentations and wildfire manager panel discussion, wherein we discussed some of the challenges that exist on these islands. It was new to some people, some of the processes that are ongoing here. Some people said, oh, you know, are the wet forests burning? I said, yes, you'd be surprised how many of the wet forests are burning. And we talked about some of the fire dynamics and how fire displaces native vegetation and promotes invasive species ingress. And then we had probably, I'm sorry to say, for all of you who were fabulous presenters yesterday, we had an additionally fabulous panel of early career researchers who were discussing the decisions that they made. They were in their mid-20s, the decisions that they made to go into climate adaptation and work related to fire. And it was really inspiring. And I hope that those of you who are youth and students in the group or count yourselves among youth and students in your heart, we will go ahead and continue to engage creatively and provocatively with each other so that we can identify solutions that perhaps we have not yet landed upon. Anyway, yesterday was great. I'm sure today will be great as well. I'm going to hand it over to Darren to introduce you to what we're going to cover today. Mahalo again for joining us.
Thank you, Mary Vaughn. And again, aloha, everybody. Welcome, including all the folks that we have gathering online. You know, I think you're all participating in these meetings and seeing what we are continuing to experience in kind of this transition post-COVID, where some are comfortable joining us in person, and we welcome you, and others online, and we welcome you as well. I was asked to remind the folks that are online to don't be afraid to ask questions. We do not have an online system set up in which it's interactive per se, but you can use the chat and you can ask questions, and our team in the back of the room physically here will grab those questions and be able to ask them of our panel members and others. So we encourage you to do so. So again, as Mary Vaughn said, welcome. This is actually day 3 of Climate Week, day 2 of our PI-CASC Climate Adaptation Research Summit. And if that's not confusing enough, there's like half a dozen other things going on all at the same time as well. So hopefully you're able to get into the places you wanted to go and see the things you wanted to see. Tomorrow will be the last day focused on energy policy. It'll be at the campus center and it'll wrap up our Climate Week. The team that's put this together decided that a week is 4 days. So I am Darren Lerner, as Mary Vaughn introduced me. Thank you, Mary Vaughn. I do serve as here at the University of Hawaii as the consortium director for PI-CASC. I wear a couple of other hats on our lovely campus here. So as was said, day 2, which should be up above you, and it's here in front of me, we're going to have a couple of different pieces. We have 2 themes, if you will, the first of which on integrated watershed science And we'll talk more, and Steve Gray from Alaska will tell you a lot more in depth about our what is referred to as PI-CASC, our PI-CASC collaboration, Pacific Islands and Alaska. And then for our second theme, we will discuss sea level rise adaptation science, and you'll hear a lot about the dialogues and the conversations that we've been having over the years around sea level rise issues. So with that, what I get to do, which is certainly a pleasure and a privilege, is to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today. Dr. Kawika Winter is joining us today. And thank you, Kawika, because I know he is very busy. And in fact, I want to tell you all in advance, later on the panel, Kawika is going to have to take off. So, you know, just so it's not abrupt for you, he'll be up here, he'll be participating, and then he's just going to get up and go to the next thing, which is to take care of a graduate student, which is what we do here at the university. Okay, so Dr. Kawika Winter was previously the director of Limahuli Garden and Preserve on Kauai, where he led the Hyena Ahupua'a project. That project aimed to engage in biocultural restoration on a mountain to sea scale. So very appropriate for the topic, the first topic today. In 2018, Dr. Winter became the director of the Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve, or the NER, to support community-led Ahupua'a scale restoration here on Oahu. Kawika is also a biocultural ecologist with appointments at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, in the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, and I believe botany no more, right, in its Department of Life Sciences, but he's part of botany, and in fact, all of his education came up through botany here at UH, and also he's connected with our Natural Resources Environmental Management Department. In the scientific realm, he has deep interest in the dynamics within and resilience of social ecological systems. And I asked Kawika earlier, I said, I need a little juicy tidbit of what do you do when you're not working? He's like, I work. And I get that. But then I kept pulling, and he said, you know, any opportunity he has, he really enjoys spending any time he's not working in the ocean. Although I know Kawika, and even when he's in the ocean, he's working. All right, please give it up for Kawika Winter and his keynote presentation entitled Supporting Indigenous Approaches to Science and Stewardship in Hawaii.
Thank you for the invitation to present to you folks today. So I was taught early on to always know your audience when you're presenting, and I'm at a unique disadvantage is I don't really know who the audience is today. I see a few friends and collaborators up there in the room, Christian, but I don't know where most of you folks are from. So it would be really helpful to me if I could just know who's from Hawaii or based in Hawaii. Please raise your hand. Oh, wow, that's almost everybody. Okay, I hear there's some Alaska people. Okay, Pacific Islands, mostly online. Are they online, maybe? Okay, that's very helpful for me, thank you. Is anybody coming on the site visit to Heʻeia tomorrow? Okay, so I will be sharing a little bit about Heʻeia, so to give you a little teaser for tomorrow. So I'm gonna be sharing with you folks about our efforts, collective efforts in Hawaii to support Indigenous science and stewardship through a process of biocultural restoration. Biocultural restoration is kind of one of those buzz terms that's been going around the past few years. And the way I look at it and have been describing it is a process of reviving our relationship to place and to biodiversity of place and all of the things that shape the languages and the cultures and the identities of our ancestors. And we've been engaging in that process in Hawaii, and you'll be hearing about that more on the panel today and how it relates to conservation and things like that. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, you know, Darren said, even when I'm in the ocean, I'm thinking, and that is true, working, doing things, but I've been ruminating on this word nature for a while. Nature, what is nature? I think there's two ways to look at nature. You know, when I was, as Darren mentioned, I came up through the university system here. I got all three of my degrees just across the way in the botany department. And when I was an undergraduate, you know, I'm the kind of guy, I love knowledge, I embrace learning. So I usually start at the front of the classroom. But And here in the UH system, I started at the front, but I slowly migrated towards the back of the room because the professors, the people in positions of authority were speaking about conservation and nature as something separate from us. And that didn't resonate with me. And then I was 18, 19 years old, hadn't yet found my voice. So I was thinking that I was wrong. And so I migrated from the front of the room to the back of the room. And it wasn't until I had a class from Tamara Titkin called Ecological Ethnobotany, and one of the texts of that class was Sacred Ecology by Fikret Berkes, and that really helped me to find my voice because it showed me that the way I think about nature isn't wrong. So there's this perception of nature that I think is dominant in the American environmental movement that has influenced federal policy. It's influenced how NGOs do conservation, but it's looking at nature as something separate from humanity that needs to be protected from humanity. And the way I think naturally, and the way I've been taught by the elders who have taught me, is that we are related to nature, we are part of nature. And it's through that relationship that things thrive. And it's when you separate the two apart artificially, that's when, problems arise. And so, in Hawaiian culture, and as many Pacific Islander cultures, indigenous cultures around the world, there is no separation between humanity and nature. So this is Hawaii is a great place to learn about this way of thinking. So we hear the word within the realm of conservation, we hear about wildlife, right? So when you look at these pictures, a lot of conservationists and scientists will say, oh, look at that Hawaiian wildlife. But for us in Hawaii, we say, look at our cousins. Look at the things we're related to. How are they doing? Are they sick? Do they need some help? And then when we engage in helping these things and caring for them, do we do it as people who are related to these things, or we're separate from them? But you hear these words a lot. So we hear dominant in conservation, even within the university system, in our conservation biology classes, within our federal policy relating to conservation within NOAA or US Fish and Wildlife Service or things like that. We hear these terms, nature and wildlife, wilderness and wildlife. And these are all terms that put things in a framework of nature being separate from us. But as I was saying earlier, these aren't the teachings of our elders here in Hawaii. And so when these words are imposed on us, it is, basically an imposition of tools of colonization, which has always been aimed in the United States to separate indigenous people from their places and from their ancestral traditions. And just because this time it's for a good reason, doesn't make it okay. And that is the perspective that a lot of indigenous people have for those of us in conservation. But so just looking at Hawaiian language for a little bit, we have these, is there a word for nature in Hawaiian? I don't know. Ulali, is there a word for nature in Hawaiian? Yeah. And we're gonna hear from Ulali in a bit. But generally, the ones that most people would come up with are Aina or Moku or Kai or Moana, and these are terms relating to islands. Aina is a kind of island, Moku is a kind of island. And then the other two are different kinds of oceans. We have Kai is a kind of ocean and Moana is a kind of ocean. What's the difference there? The difference is Aina is, according to Malo in his writings in the mid-1800s, an island is called Aina when it has people on it. And there is no way to have an island without people and have it be Aina. If it doesn't have people, it's called a Moku. So if you apply that thinking, we start to see the differentiation between these two words of Kai and Moana. Kai is, we're an ocean people. We're in the ocean all the time. We're surfing, we're fishing, we're swimming. It's said in Hawaii that in the old days, we learned to swim before we could walk. We were ocean people, we're island people. And so Kai is the part of the ocean that people are always in. Moana is the part of the ocean that people aren't. But these aren't terms of nature that separate us out. It just tells us the places that we kind of belong in the context of this grand scheme of things. One of the things I like to touch on is the notion of indigenous science. And, I'm in my position, I have the privilege of collaborating with some of the most amazing ecologists in the world in prestigious universities around the planet. But this man right here is the ecologist I look up to the most. Uncle Mac Poi Poi from the island of Molokai. He probably only has a high school education. I know he went to the Vietnam War probably right after he graduated high school. But you know, I'm at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, and when our folks want to understand the dynamics of ocean ecology, a lot of our PhD professors and researchers will go to him to learn. Uncle Mac Poi Poi has been recognized by the United Nations in 2019 with the Equator Prize for the work that he's helped to start here in Hawaii. But when we look at the teachings of Uncle Mac and the things he talks about, since I'm an ecologist and a biological scientist, I start to see a lot of trends between the things I learned here within the confines of the university and the things that he's talking about that he was always taught to observe and understand. Things like taxonomy and classification, how things are named in the ocean, what are their relationships, and the reproductive biology, species connectivity, species abundance, species richness. These are all the things that he looks at as a lawai'a, as a fisher person. And according to his teachings, you know, or as he was taught, and as he teaches those of us who try to follow in his footsteps, is he doesn't take something out of the ocean unless he knows how that thing is going to be replaced, which means you have to understand the life cycles, which means you have to understand the names, you have to understand the different life stages and all of that. That's scientific knowledge. And that's what he possesses, and that's what we're trying to embrace. So the notion that science is something that was only brought to us and taught to us by colonizers is generally how we were taught growing up in Hawaii, but that isn't true. And so we're trying to embrace this other narrative that acknowledges the how indigenous knowledge systems in Hawaii and around the world have been built through this engaging in the scientific process. So when we look at biocultural diversity, so that's the diversity of relationships that we have with the natural world. One of the easiest ways to look at it is with the things that are important for our indigenous food systems. And this is just a tally of the different parts of biodiversity that are important for food. And these are all things that are understood and managed and named and monitored and stewarded and things like that. So just moving a little bit forward into what is this? How do we steward lands? How do we steward islands? How do we steward watersheds in Hawaii? You know, in the 90s, when the concept of ahupua'a started to get a resurgence, there was a tendency to equate watershed and ahupua'a, but they really aren't. They're analogous. There's some similarities, but they're not the same. So ahupua'a are generally mountain to sea communities, not always, but generally mountain to sea communities. On the older islands, they tend to align with kind of with watershed, but on younger islands like Hawaii and Maui, not even closely. But ahupua'a is really a community. It's a social ecological community where there is no separation. So when we say ahupua'a, in the context of community, that means not only people, but it means the forest, it means the birds, it means the fish, it means the stream, it means the reefs. That's all a part of our community because we're all related to it. We've been looking at this concept of Indigenous Resource Management and trying to understand, you know, there's this concept of Aina Momona that we hear about that the ancestors used to manage these islands by, which is a state of sustainable superabundance. There was a process by which they went through to create more fish in the reef than could be produced on its own without being managed in the way that they did it, or more birds in the forest, or more fish in the streams, that kind of thing. So, you know, this didn't happen. It wasn't magic. So what are the ecological foundations of this process? And so we're in the process of trying to understand that, but it's generally, this is modeled for Kauai. So there's different zones in the forest. A lot of times at the top you have Wawakua, or the sacred forest, which was basically refugia for the kupuna species or the akua species, the ones that were here before in humans. They needed a place that was theirs. And then there's different kinds of forests, and then getting out, there's different kinds of reefs. These are all named and understood in this system. Oh, in the context of managing species connectivity, that happened on this larger moku scale, this regional scale. But the abiotic elements like nutrients, water, and sediment were managed on the ahupua'a scale. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. So this is an image of Heʻeia, where some of you folks will be going tomorrow. This is a photo from 1928, and this is looking at how water, nutrients, and sediment were managed in the system. So, with our orographic rain patterns and wind bringing, the wind bringing in clouds and clouds hitting the mountains and going up and precipitating rain out. Whenever you had water moving through the watershed like that, what happens? It takes sediment and it takes nutrients with it, which in a lot of watersheds, if you think Chesapeake Bay or the San Francisco Bay watershed, these can be very detrimental aspects of watershed management. But the secret of ahupua'a management is you take these, what could otherwise be bad things, and you shift them into positive. So with the sediment, you turn that into fertilizer. With the nutrients, you turn that into fertilizer. And so we have this system where this massive wetland agro-ecosystem becomes the sediment retention basin that grows food. And then you have an aquaculture system that is the nutrient retention basin that grows food. And then the water flowing out will be clean for the reefs. So I know a lot of people are thinking about aquaculture nowadays, and there's lots of different ways to define it. Aquaculture is basically growing fish, right? You're growing fish, you're making more fish in the system than the system could make on its own. And so in Hawaii is one of those places where we have these highly advanced ancestral indigenous systems of aquaculture in various classifications. We have semi-enclosed, like the fish pond that some of you folks will see tomorrow in Heʻeia. But we also have free range aquaculture that help to create a superabundance of food in the ocean. And these are all approaches that are born out of this understanding that came through the ancestors engaging in the scientific process, which we call Indigenous Science, and then applying that into resource management. So in Hawaii, biocultural restoration is helping to restore these relationships. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about lately is empowering Indigenous agency. So we talk about Indigenous agency as the ability of Indigenous people to act in their own self-interest. But for Indigenous people, because of our relationship to our lands and our waters, acting in the best interests of our lands and our waters is acting in our own best interests. And so we have these terms in Hawaii that center around this concept of aina, or this system that of relationship of people in place. And we have aloha aina. We love the land as an ancestor. And then just as if your grandma was sick, you would care for your grandma. So then that is malama aina. We care for the land as our elder. And then just as if somebody was breaking into our grandma's house, we would protect her. And same thing that happens with the aina. If the aina is being threatened, we protect the aina, and that is called kia'i aina. But it's this reciprocal relationship of that starts with giving before taking and results in an abundance. So I'm going to give two brief examples of this happening in Hawaii in two communities. So one is Hyena, and that picture is Hyena right there. And then Heʻeia, where some of you folks will be going tomorrow. So Island of Kauai, Hyena is located in the northwest corner of the Moku, or the region of Halele'a. And in that community is one of the last fully functioning ahupua'a in all of Hawaii, all the way till the 1960s. And then a lot of change happened, but come around the 90s, when the elders in the community at the time were starting to recognize that, when our families get together for weddings and funerals, we don't see the same foods that we used to. We don't see the kinds of fish, or we don't see the poi, we don't see the opai from the stream. And why is that? It's because our relationships have been breaking down. So there was a movement to revive these things, but land tenure has changed a lot. And so one of the things that the folks in Hyena said is that it doesn't matter who owns the land. What matters is we can access the aina and we can care for it, and we can reap the benefits of that care. And so that was the idea that born forth and ended up in a relationship that was called the Hyena Ahupua'a Alliance. So I was director of Limahuli Garden Preserve, which is pictured here, and we were focused on biocultural restoration based on this concept of aloha aina. And in the process, we were restoring cultural landscapes and indigenous food systems. One of the highlight examples that a lot of people know for Hyena is the Hyena community-based subsistence fishing area, which is actually the first community in the world to get this designation. So ultimately, what a community-based subsistence fishing area is, it says that the primary purpose of the nearshore fishery is to make sure that the people can continue to fish and that their grandchildren can continue to fish, and so on and so forth through the generations. The priority isn't to protect it for tourists to look at fish. The priority isn't to protect it so that commercial fishermen can make money off the place. The the primary purpose is so that the indigenous people can maintain their indigenous food system. But in the process of doing this stuff, it's really important, when you're connecting to place, we have all these place names that sometimes go dormant in our community. So we've been able to go through indigenous mapping and relearn the names of our peaks and our ridges. But that continues out into the ocean. Hyena is one of the, unfortunately, few communities who still has knowledge of its reef names. And one of our elders who just passed, unfortunately, a few years back, but he was the keeper of about 54 reef names in Hyena, Uncle Tom Hashimoto. And even he said, oh, there's way more names, but these are the only ones that I can remember because these are the places I used to fish. But look at that, just filled with names. But this is all about when you're restoring your relationship to place, understanding the names of the place. How do you, when you're speaking to this place, what's its name? And when you hear about these old songs and these old chants, and you hear about these place names, where are they? It's all a process of reconnection. So that's the work that I was fortunate enough to be contributing to while I was in Hyena on the island of Kauai. And then, as Darren said, I moved back here in 2018 to help support the ahupua'a-based restoration efforts in Heʻeia, and which have been going on since a good 2 decades at this point. When we're on Kauai doing this work, a lot of the naysayers would say, oh, of course you could do this kind of stuff on Kauai. It's really rural and it's really remote, but you can never do it on Oahu. So challenge accepted. We are trying to do it on Oahu. So one of the things about Heʻeia is it's in half urban environment. So how do you revive Indigenous resource management in a half urban environment? That is the question that we're all trying to answer. A lot of us in this room are supporting that in various ways with research or other ways, and we're going to hear about some of that. But one of the things that happened is that a National Estuarine Research Reserve was designated in the area back in 2017 on President Obama's last day in office. It got signed into existence, and this didn't start the work. It's really important for me to acknowledge that the work in Heʻeia has been going on literally for generations. I like to think that the story started in the late 60s when there were plans to build a nuclear power plant in Heʻeia to supply the military base with power, and the community got together and they stopped it. And then there were speculative development plans to, like, if you know where the fish pond is, there was plans to dredge that and turn that into a private marina and make a gated community across the bridge on the Kauai side. And the community was really feeling themselves after they stopped the construction of a nuclear power plant. So they set their sights on stopping speculative development in their community, and they did it. And then, that was, I like to talk about it as first generation Hawaiian Renaissance leaders. And then our generation came into our own, and some of my friends and contemporaries started other nonprofit organizations in the early 2000s to care for these places that the previous generation protected. And now one of the main purposes of the Heʻeia National Estuarine Research Reserve is to support this effort, support it in multiple ways. One of the ways is through research. And so this is a brief synopsis of our reserve. It's relatively small, big for Hawaii, but small in the system. It's a lot smaller than Alaska. But we have multiple habitats. We describe it as an indigenous and community conserved area, which is the first in the system to be led by indigenous processes. So ultimately, as a research reserve, we have an overarching research question, which is what are the effects of biocultural restoration on ecosystem services? And so part of it is monitoring the various steps of restoration. So step one being the removal of invasive species, and then restoring using biocultural restoration approaches to restore wetland agroecology and indigenous aquaculture, and to do biological monitoring that shows what's happening. We're not only focused on the native species, human engagement in the system is really important. So one of our more exciting projects I like to think is actually a collaboration that we've been doing with our NER in Alaska up in Kachemak Bay. Is we got together and we wrote a grant, and since we both work very closely with our indigenous communities and our universities, we're trying to figure out what are some biocultural indicators of well-being. So what are the perceptions of well-being in these communities? What are the elements that can be monitored so we can track the health of the relationships in the system that include the native species and the people? But because of this work, our community partners were recognized as Hawaii's Conservation Heroes in 2019. So ultimately, though, the collaboration between indigenous and conventional approaches offer us up hope for the future. And I'm really hoping that that's what we can talk about on our panel soon, and the conversations can continue on from there. So with that, I'll say mahalo.
Thank you, Kawika. And as Kawika mentioned, and yeah, if you don't mind holding for 1 second, we do have time. Kawika is going to be on the panel later, so we'll have more interaction with him, but we do have time at least for one and maybe for two, and I'll be getting nods up or down or on that to open it up for questions. Remember, for the folks that are joining us online, you can chat in your questions. They'll be repeated here. And yeah, questions for Kawika. Thank you, Kawika. Great talk.
Christian, you have a question? No.
And if you do, let me get to you with the mic if you do have a question. And yeah, Brad's over there. Maybe I'll get it going a little bit, Kawika. You know, yesterday we had this really great early career panel at the end of the day, and there was a couple of different questions in different ways, but that we're really trying to get at these local approaches, you know, to climate change and those kinds of things versus, I guess, versus global approaches. And I think recognizing, I mean, you know, I think at the heart of that question, we have to recognize, obviously, that we live on a planet. And that even if we do the very, very best that we can do, let's say here, let's be Hawaii-centric and say we do the very best we do locally, and we are successful, we are impacted by what the rest of the globe does. So how do we spread that? How do we help other places around the globe understand that taking care of your Aina and acting locally, and if we all do that,
Yeah, well, thank you, Darren. That is the question, right? That's what we're all trying to figure out how to answer. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of this work in Hawaii is aligned. And there's a lot of alignments between the work that we do and the work that the Polynesian Voyaging Society and Hokulea and the Ohana Wa'a have been doing. And when they went on the worldwide voyage, one of their things that they really spoke about was he wa'a, he moku, he wa'a, which means an island is a canoe is an island. And so you get a Pacific Islander, we've been living in Pacific Islands for 6,000 years, and we moved around on canoes. And when we're on a canoe, you can be at a canoe for a month or two at sea. When you're on that canoe, you have to know how to manage your resources. If you don't, you all die, right? And then you find an island, and that thinking doesn't just disappear, that thinking stays there, but it gets applied on a bigger system. You're still on a canoe in the middle of the ocean, just happens to be an island. And so I think a lot of what the worldwide voyage, Malama Honua and the Polynesian Voyaging Society with Hokulea and Hiki and all those folks have been trying to do is talk about our planet is an island. We have to think about our planet as an island in the middle of space. If we don't take care of this thing, we're not going to make it to where we're going. And so I think a lot of the times it's an issue of scale, whereas our mere Homo sapien brains haven't evolved to understand issues globally. We've evolved to understand them on watershed scales, on island scales. And so if we can find these model systems that can help us to understand these problems in a scalable way that we can perceive, we understand the problems and we can understand the solutions, and then we scale those up from there. I think that's the hope that we have for the future. And that's what Pacific Islands, the gift that Pacific Islands bring to the world, because preparing for unexpected and catastrophic storms, that's what our whole systems were built around, to recover from that, to be resilient from that. And how do people on continents learn from that? To me, one of the very fundamental elements of that is the relationship of people of place. If you see nature as separate from you, you're already on the wrong path. And so we need to kind of indigenize, to some people hate that word, but to think about how we're related. You don't have to be indigenous to be related to your place. So think about what that means. How can you relate to your place in whatever way, no matter what your cultural history is or your genealogical history is, there's something there, and we all need to embrace that and cultivate it.
Mahalo, Kawika. One quick one before we transition. Please let us all know who you are.
Aloha mai kako, I'm Ulalia Woodsidely, and mahalo Kawika for your presentation. Integrated watershed science. So my question is, as we look at Haena and Heʻeia, can you provide us in the room kind of an example of where you saw integrated watershed science done well? And then if we have time, just a little bit of an example of where it maybe was not done quite as well. To just help us take, because I think those are two fabulous examples. And as scientists in the room, just what can we take away as, where did you see it, that integrated watershed science done well, and where's a lesson that we could learn where it was not quite done as well?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, so I'm gonna answer that concisely. It's a really great question. I think, generally speaking, one of the reasons why, I'll just state that Heʻeia and Hyena does it well, but the reason why they do it well is because it's community led. The examples I've seen, I'm not going to say where they are, that aren't so well is when NGO organizations show up with a bunch of PhDs and try to tell the people the way to do it, and have that assumption of a superiority of their knowledge system over the knowledge system of the people of place. And whether it's fencing or how you're approaching conservation, if people show up who aren't from there and present to the community that they have the answers, that's the wrong way to do it. Because even if you have some short-term gains, you've already lost because the people aren't supporting the efforts. And after those guys disappear, it's the people that are going to be there. And are they going to carry that work forward, or are they going to cut all the fences as soon as you guys leave, kind of thing? So in Haena, we did build conservation fences, but we did so with support, 100% hunter support from the community. And we did that by, so everybody knows, right? Ungulates are issue, major issue, watershed issue, sedimentation, deforestation, that kind of thing. Communities all around Hawaii, hunting communities, native Hawaiian communities, usually fight the construction of fences. But in Haena, it's a small community, but all of our hunting families were in support. It's because we brought them to the table and said, hey, we got these super rare plants we got to protect. We think we can do it with a fence. We don't want to build a fence in a way that cuts off your access to the valley. We have this crazy idea that there's a way that we can actually construct a fence that'll help you guys hunt more efficiently. So it's a win-win. It's a win for the valley. It's a win for the plants. It's a win for you guys. And we brought everybody to the table and we designed a fence that helped them hunt better, more efficiently, and it protected the plants. And so when you acknowledge the relationship of people of place and the knowledge that they have for their own place, and bring them into the conversation and support them in leading the conversation, that's when it works.
Can everybody give it up again one more time? Thank you so much, Kawika and